Many of us say it's dying we fear, not death. Ron Delbane, nationally known spiritual director and teacher based in Birmingham, Alabama, teaches us that God is present in dying as in living. Knowing this, we can embrace the dying process and be fully there for each other.
In the process of death and dying, it's not uncommon to experience moments for which there are no words. Some people are more aware of these moments than others. Some are afraid of them. Some talk about sensing God's presence. To explore the sacred in death and dying is to be alert to the holy, to be aware of those sacred moments, and to look for the deeper meaning. Communicating involves speaking, hearing, listening, and in fact all the senses, and does not happen all that often. One place where communicating is difficult is in the family. Families generally have a way of communicating in ordinary times, but in times of stress and trauma, those ways of communicating sometimes become strained and even dwindle to nothing. At the time of her mother's illness, Eleanor wanted her family to continue to communicate well.
And one of my brothers said, well, that's a heck of a thing. You've got a heck of a lot of nerve doing that, calling everybody home to talk about Mother dying. And he thought that was very negative and just very nervy. And I said, well, yeah, I do have a lot of nerve doing that. It's taken a lot of courage to do it. It was quite a powerful meeting, a lot of tears, some laughter, but all sitting around in a hospital waiting room asking the doctor about Mother and what her prognosis was, how she might die, how long she might live, and what that would be. And the longer it went on, the more people had courage to ask questions. And I think that led to more communication through her whole illness. And then after both parents died, as siblings, we've kept in touch with each other and gotten together every year. And we'd never done that before. And it opened up a communication in the family system.
In the task of exploring the sacred in death and dying, it's important to remember that there are family dynamics that influence communication. One way that I've found helpful to start conversation with families about their own styles of communication is to ask them some simple questions about the characters in their family. It's important to know that these characters are in most families and that they're neither good nor bad, they're simply present. So in sitting with them, I will often ask, who's the worrier in your family? This is the person who seems to take on the family worries, and in times of stress and trauma, they probably will not be able to handle all the worries of the family. Who is the fixer in your family? Is there someone who always needs to fix things? They're the person to whom others go. Do you have a truth speaker in your family? This is someone who will always be encouraging that the truth be spoken. Perhaps you have a cave dweller in your family, someone who in times of stress and trauma especially will simply retreat into their cave. Who's the switchboard operator? Who's the person who sits at the telephone? People call her or him. They call other people. They're the center of the operation. Do you have a dark cloud? No matter what is said, there'll always be a dark side talked about or referred to. Do you have a peacemaker? Someone who can't stand any kind of conflict, so always trying to make things happen well and be peaceful. Sometimes when families communicate on a regular basis in open and honest ways, it doesn't make much difference whether they live in close proximity to one another or whether they live at some distance.
We kind of had a routine of staying connected with the family. We're a fairly close-knit family, even though we're spread all over the country. That we would call at a certain time each night when whoever was down there would be back from the hospital, and kind of give the update and kind of relieve the strain of that one person that was there. The week I was there, due to the insurance situation and that, had to check into a long-term care facility, knowing that she really wouldn't ever get there. And that was a very difficult thing to do, to have to go out and set that up. And I went out in the hallway and called my brother Herm and just talked to him about, how I was feeling and how I didn't think Mom was going to make it there and that kind of thing.
Being away was hard because you heard one thing from one person in the family. Oh, she's just so bad and she looks so terrible. And then from the other one, it's, well, she's doing pretty good. And where do you put that? Where do you put that in your mind? It's hard to do because you don't know. And then I'd go back and I'd see her and it'd be okay. And then I would come back home and it would be, Mother would call and say, oh, she's worse. And she looks terrible and she's going to die.
Sometimes communication comes easily, as it did in Rob's family, or not so easily, as in Maggie's. Sometimes communication at a time of death and dying does not happen at all. And what happens when information is withheld? Peggy tells us about her brother's death.
We didn't tell the other family members because that's what he wanted. So we tried to respect that, to honor that, basically. But so when he died, there was a whole lot of feelings. There was anger, there was guilt. We dealt with, basically my mother, she was just hurt. Family members were angry because, nobody told us, we found out at the last minute that he's sick. And then there was guilt because we didn't tell, So we dealt with a lot of different emotions. And then we dealt with the fact that we never had anybody to die that was this close to us. And so we had to deal with that too.
Yeah. And here you are, a social worker. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to be able to handle all that.
Yeah. But when it's personal, sometimes it's a little bit different, because it's right there at your door,
I'm reminded of Barbara and Jeff. Barbara was a social worker working with Jeff, who was in the hospital. Jeff told her that he knew he was dying, but he did not want his family to know. The family had told Barbara that they knew Jeff was dying, but they didn't want him to know. Barbara was caught in a dilemma. She chose to risk. One time, during a visit, all the family was present. And Barbara simply said, Jeff has told me that he knows he's dying and doesn't want you, the family, to know, and you, the family, have told me that you know he's dying and you don't want him to know. There. Now everyone knows. It's out in the open. Now you can choose to do one of two things. One, you can choose to pretend that this conversation never happened, or you can decide that you want to begin to talk with one another. Whatever you do, I'll support you. It's important to remember that when communication is open and honest, we feel like we are more a part of the experience. To be shut out of an experience means that we do not have the opportunity to explore the sacred. Sometimes families are not able to do this by themselves. They need someone from the outside to help give them some hints, some skills, some modeling.
And I started to leave, and he said, don't wait till tomorrow. I came and knelt by the bed, and I said, what do you mean? He said, I'm very sick. And I said, yes, I know it. I'm probably going to die this time. And I said, yes, that's what they tell me. How do you feel about that? And he said, I just feel great. He said, I've had such a good life. And then he talked about that. And then he's looking forward to going to heaven and seeing people that have gone on before him and so forth. And we were just having the best time, and his daughter was at the head of the bed, and she was just weeping copiously, not making a sound.
In that moment of experiencing their conversation, the daughter was able to recognize the sacred, and in fact yearned to share that kind of sacred moment with her father. John tells us what the daughter told him later.
And she said, that was just a beautiful sight. She said, you two men were sitting there, and I thought it was like you were planning a fishing trip. And you were saying, okay, you bring the bait, and I'll bring the drinks, and we'll get out on the lake by sunup and so forth. And she said it was just so right in comparison to the way we had been relating to Daddy whenever he said, let's talk about heaven, or the fact that I'm going to die, or I'm looking forward to seeing. We'd say, Daddy, don't talk like that. There's going to be a miracle, or you're going to be saved, or you're going to get well, and just denied the reality that he was open to and ready to embrace. But she said, when I saw you doing that, I said, that's the way it ought to be. So when you left, I sat down and we went through that whole thing again, and it was wonderful.
Many families tell me that they are not able to communicate because they never learned the skills. But with the help of someone else, they learn to communicate in ways they had not before. That's the grace that happens when we explore new ways to recognize and bring forth the sacred in communication. People like Barbara and John are able to facilitate the process. An open and honest communication helps us explore the sacred. And now, the question is, what are the dynamics of communication in your family? Communicating well in the family is a great support to members of the family. But there is a wider circle that can also provide support for families. This wider circle includes friends, loved ones, those who live at a distance, and people who share a common heritage or religion. Sometimes patients and members of the family tell me that in this time of stress, that it's hard to pray. Sometimes they even feel abandoned or too sick or too confused to pray. Something that some people have found helpful is called a focused thought, or a short, simple prayer, sometimes known as the breath prayer. It's a way to help people have their deep desires put into words. I suggest to people that their prayer or their focused thought may be a line from the Scripture. For example, it may be something from one of the Psalms. The Lord is my shepherd. Or it may be something from another section such as, come to me, you are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Or their focused thought or prayer may come from a hymn. It may be a line of a hymn such as Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Or there is a wideness in God's mercy. Or their prayer may rise right out of their own deep desires, and they create a prayer. So it's in their own words and their own prayer. It may be something like, let me feel your peace, O God. Or lead me to the light, O God. Or simply, be with me. Eleanor was able to share with her friend Kathy about a breath prayer, and thus achieve a deeper sense of bonding not only with Kathy, but provide for Kathy and her family a deeper way of communicating.
I encouraged her to choose a prayer, a simple prayer that she could pray. And I told her then that mornings out running, I would be saying that prayer too, so we would be in that kind of communication with each other. And it developed a very strong bond between us, a great freedom. On her final days, and she had a very long, lingering death, I would talk with her husband rather than talk with her. And he was running out of things to say with her and a lot of sitting with her. So I suggested he ask Kathy if he could say her breath prayer with her. And she liked that idea. And then in Kathy's final days, he would just sit by her side and just pray her prayer with her. And then finally, when it came time, she invited her family in one more time, and they said her breath prayer with her while she died. And then Craig wrote me some months later that when it was really hard for him, he would say the prayer, and he felt very much one with her.
Many people share their prayer with their extended family. people in their church or temple or synagogue, or other good friends. Praying the prayer together lets people join in the journey into the sacred. An even wider dimension of our extended family is our heritage and our ethnic background that influence us so much in our understanding of death and dying. I'm reminded of Marie, a former librarian, who had spent a great many years of her life lecturing about her ancestors who were slaves in the southern part of the United States. She was dying and in a great deal of pain. In a conversation one day, I asked, "Marie, how do you handle your pain?" And she responded, "Ron, I come from a people of pain. And so even though it's my own pain, it's also a pain of my people. And so I unite my pain with theirs. And I feel like I'm living with my ancestors." This was similar to a response Esther gave me when she was talking about her pain. She said, "Ron, the people of Israel have always been a people of pain, journeying to a new homeland."
I think that the Jewish people is such a family. It's a collective, almost bound together with history. We are a historical people. That very broad fabric of history. We've endured so many Holocausts, so many persecutions, that I think that we are bound together by these events, by this history.
Many of us have very deep and loving friendships with others. When dying and death happens, generally the focus is on the family. Friends oftentimes move to the margins and in fact are sometimes ignored. When my own friend Taylor died, I didn't know what to do about the death of my best friend. I began to feel anger. I knew on the one hand that the focus should be on the family and their loss. On the other hand, I wanted someone to pay attention to me. Throughout the whole process of grieving and the funeral and graveside, I felt alone. As I was walking away from the grave, someone I knew only by acquaintance walked over and put his arm on my shoulder and said, "You and Taylor were really good friends, weren't you?" I collapsed in his arms in tears. I'd been recognized. Ever since then, I've made it a point to pay attention to the good friends. I try to encourage families to invite friends into the process of dying so that they can sense that they are a part of the process. I will oftentimes spend just a few minutes, a word or a prayer, with the pallbearers at a funeral, who generally are chosen because they were good friends. I'm reminded of one time working with Bill as he was planning his wife's funeral. In the midst of the funeral planning, he said almost absent-mindedly, "Oh, Molly is sure going to miss Evelyn." I'd never heard the name Molly before. I said, "Who's Molly?" And he said again offhandedly, "Oh, she's a teenager down the street. Her mother died a couple years ago, and Evelyn kind of became a surrogate mother to her." I knew Molly needed to be involved in the service somehow.
It's important, I think, that ministers allow friends to participate and not just be there for the family. Because we always said, and Lee always said as well, that I have two families. I have the family that God gave me, and then I have the family that I chose. And I chose all my friends, and they chose me. So we were two families together, needing the consolation and the consoling of a minister.
Being sensitive to a friend's need can result in including them in what is going on, or giving them some special possession of the person who has died that will have meaning to them. My friend Dale gave me a great gift. Sometime before he died, we were visiting, He was laying in his bed. He got up, sat down in a chair next to me, looked me straight in the eye and said, "What size suit do you wear, Ron?" Well, I said, 40 regular. "Well, do you mind wearing someone else's clothes?" "No, why?" And he got up out of his chair and he walked over to his closet, opened the doors, and turned to me and said, "You're certainly going to have a lot of good clothes when I'm dead." And he started to pull out jackets, pants, saying things like, "Oh, you'll look good in this color. Oh, this is a good suit." Then he pulled out the sleeve of a herringbone jacket and he said, "Ron, whenever you wear this, remember that this was my favorite jacket." Well, I was just stunned. He was leaving his clothes to me, and he'd always been known to be such a good dresser. All I could struggle to say was, "Thank you, Dale." He waved my comment away with his hand and simply said, "What size shoe do you wear?" "Well, 9.5 or 10. "Can't help you there. I'm an 8.5. I turned to him and I said, "I'll tell you what, you provide the suits, I'll provide the shoes." And we laughed together for what turned out to be the last time. After his death, I received his clothing, and I wear something of his nearly every day. And when I do, I remember, and I feel connected. I've shared this story with many people who are ill and dying and encouraged them to pick out things that they would like to give to members of their families, but also their friends. I've shared this with widows, with widowers, when they need to clean out their closets. I said, remember the friends of your loved one. One woman said to me after church one day, "You know, I just love seeing Bob's friends wear his suits on Sunday morning." An important part of exploring the sacred is exploring what it means to be connected.
Yeah, I've got something of Dad's that was his father's as well. Tools. My dad was always making things, woodworking, that kind of thing. I've got some of his hand tools. And his father was a tool and die maker. And I've got some tools that he made that are, my kids just think they're ancient, old, rusty tools, but they're neat, And that, so that's what I've got of Dad's. And I go out in the workshop and sometimes use that old hammer instead of the new one, just to be connected there.
There is great comfort in being connected with family and friends, whether through prayer, our heritage, religion, or objects of remembrance. The more we are aware of the connections we have, the more likely we are to move more deeply into honest and open times of sacred communication with one another. When I asked Maggie what she would like to share about communication with those who are watching this video, this is what she said.
Don't be afraid to love the person who's dying. Don't be afraid to be honest with them. And don't be afraid to let them be honest. I have had the opportunity to share my experience and share a lot of what I felt while this was going on, including being honest and saying, okay, God, I'm not happy with you for doing this. And people just look at you like, excuse me? And it is true. When somebody that you love is going to die, I don't know how you cannot be angry and hurt and mad. And then you finally turn around and say, okay, Lord, just love us through it. Get us through it, with grace and love. And you have to let a lot of things go by. You just have to let the unimportant things kind of fly. And it's amazing how many things are unimportant that you think are really important, and they're not.
With Maggie's words in mind, what can you do to improve communication with your family and your friends?